Teach me about the Great Lakes. Teach me about the Great Lakes. Welcome back to Teach Me About the Great Lakes, a exactly twice monthly, no more, no less, exactly two podcast in which I, a Great Lakes novice, ask people who are smarter and harder working than I am to teach me all about the Great Lakes. My name is Stuart Carlton. I know a lot about doing a whole draft in which you discuss the ways in which you are going to very cleverly figure out in advance whether or not you can play a baseball game, and then go to the baseball game and start to play the baseball game, only to have all of that pre-work ruined by a storm that pops up. Unbeknownst to you, unbeknownst to the meteorologist you consulted, unbeknownst to the 4 different freaking websites you were looking at. But I don't know a lot about the Great Lakes, and that's the point of this here show. Joined today by the one, the only, the special Carolyn, the full dog herself, Foley. How are you, full dog?
Carolyn. How are you, full dog? I'm doing great, Stuart. Doing great.
It's like this stupid sports talk
really
show.
Funny because it's been, and I don't think that anyone who actually used to call me full dog listens to this at all, but maybe I'll start sharing it. So I'll be like, hey, somebody's calling me that again. Okay.
The old FD, like Farley Drexel Hatcher. Do you remember that? Do you read those Fudge books? Maybe I'll start calling you Fudge Foley. Fudgy Foley. Anyway.
There we go.
Fantastic. Well, anyway, that's not why we're here. It's not even clear why we're here at this point, to be honest, but that's okay.
Because we're getting back. We're trying to get back on track.
We're getting back in the groove. The groove. Yeah. No, it's all good. It's all good. Actually, I'm pretty excited about this because there's certain things that we're just always going to talk about. And when I saw this article, it was something I didn't even know existed. But I said, well, this is obvious topic. And I said, we should talk about this on Ask Dr. Fish and on Teach Me About the Great Lakes. And we did. And that is the apparent presence of goldfish in the Great Lakes. And I'm making a big assumption here. We're going to get into it in a second. I'm making a big assumption that these are the same goldfish like you get at the county fair when you throw a ping pong into a fishbowl. Maybe we're going to find out it's a totally different goldfish, and this will be embarrassing for everybody. But first, let's go ahead and play our researcher feature. Researcher feature. A feature in which a researcher gonna teach us about the Great Lakes. Our guest today is Dr. John Midwood. John is a research scientist at the Great Lakes Laboratory for Fish and Aquatic Sciences, part of Fisheries and Oceans Canada in Ontario, and he's in Hamilton, I believe is what. Yeah, John, how are you today?
I'm doing great. How are you folks doing? Thanks so much for having me.
John is the author of an interesting new article, co-author, one of several authors of an interesting new article called Life Outside the Fishbowl, Tracking an Introduced Population of Goldfish in an Embayment on the Laurentian Great Lakes. So this is great. So John, let's start off, first of all, we may be able to end this call right now. These are the same goldfish, right, that like you get at the county fairs. Is that correct?
That's absolutely right. So the exactly same species of goldfish, and we actually think a lot of the times they're arriving in these systems because people are letting them go.
Yeah. So like they have pets. We've talked about this with Tim Campbell before, and they don't want to, they have to move or whatever, and so they don't want to toss a little flushy down the toilet. So they put it in the lake instead, which is perfect. And so they can live in it. They don't get frozen out in the lakes or whatever. I guess their biology.
They do just fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they're from originally from Eastern Asia, China, and so they're pretty similar climate, temperate climate. They get cold winters, they get warm summers, all that kind of good stuff. They've been around in the North America, I think, since the 1800s, if not even earlier. I saw one article talking about 1600s kind of a goldfish coming over and as part of the pet trade. So they've been here for a long time, but thriving in Hamilton Harbor, where we do our work. They've been thriving since at least the 1960s.
Okay, so I have so many questions about you had like your pet goldfish when you were a kid, right? And it's like, so someone in the 1600s also like had a little pet goldfish that they like.
Yeah, so goldfish have been pets, I think in China going back to at least the 9th century. So it's a long history of them being ornamental pets in ponds, not always in a glass bowl on your counter, but nice to look at, nice to watch. And actually the distinctive like orange we think of is actually bred by people. So that's all us through selection getting goldfish to look that way. And the longer they spend in the wild, they actually revert back to more their greenish, goldish color. And that's so one way we can kind of distinguish the ones that have been recently let go into the system and those that maybe have been kicking around for a while. And
is it on an individual basis or like a subpopulation basis? Because I could see them changing their color back as part of like a local evolution, right? To try to be better adapted, better camouflage, I suppose. Or do you mean each individual? Like if I put out Little Fluffy and then I come back in 4 years, Little Fluffy will have changed colors.
I don't know for sure. My understanding though is that it's actually more population level. So like those gold, orange goldfish are getting snapped up pretty readily if the water's clear enough, because they just stand out. Whereas the ones that have the different morph, and if they can spawn, and the babies in the next generation are not always necessarily going to be orange.
It's like those stupid moths you always learn about in genetics class. What are those?
Yeah,
things?
yeah.
Anyway,
the ones from England, the dusty moth. Yeah.
Okay, so we can back up. So you said, in case the water's clear. So you did this study in Hamilton Harbor, and it's Harbor with a U. I went through all the notes, and I'm changing them back, Stuart, because this is like the one time I am absolutely 100% allowed to spell it correctly.
Yes, correctly.
Thank you, John. Those are not Canadian geese; they are Canada geese. Thank you very much. Okay, so can you tell us a little bit about Hamilton Harbor and kind of why it's special, and why did you study there? Tell us a little bit about the history of that.
For sure. So Hamilton Harbor is at the far west end of Lake Ontario. It's big triangular shaped embayment. It's 22 meters deep, 21 square kilometers, a big system. It's a long history of human development and degradation. It's actually one of the Great Lakes areas of concern. So for the past 30 years, efforts have been underway to try to recover the system. And the initial sort of stressors were related to people being there. So sewage, eutrophication, those kinds of problems we often find, but also a pretty heavy industrial presence, especially along the South Shore. So the system's pretty degraded, and that's one of the reasons we think the goldfish have done so well, is that the fish populations themselves are pretty degraded. So there's these opportunities for species like goldfish to come in and really thrive. Initially, when the system was first listed as an area of concern, common carp were the culprit species that was sort of seen as degrading a lot of the habitat. And I should say too, at the far west end of the harbor, there's a place called Coote's Paradise Marsh, which, as the name implies, once was a paradise. Birds, abundant with birds, abundance with fish, all those kinds of good things. But over the years, degradation has really brought it down to be one of the most impaired coastal wetlands in the Great Lakes. And so a lot of the effort towards recovering Coote's Paradise Marsh has been to try to keep the carp out. And so in 1996, a fishway was put in place. The one point where the marsh connects to the harbor, they put a big fishway in, and that was meant to actively pass the good fish over and stop the carp from getting in. And they still do it. I was there this morning, and they actually were doing lifts still and passing, channel catfish over and pushing the carp back into the harbor. And so it's been really successful. So since 1996, we've seen a 50% reduction in biomass of carp, which is great news. So, if you don't know carp, they stir up the sediment, they eat, which wrecks the vegetation, which ruins the habitat. They have all these sort of, they're, ecosystem engineers in that sense, right? Really changing the environment. So it's great success on the carp front. At the same time, with the carp kind of dropping in numbers, these goldfish that have been kicking around since at least the 60s, they have very similar habitat needs and feeding requirements as the carp. And so they've actually come up in numbers. And we've actually seen a 5 to 10-fold increase in the number of goldfish we catch in our surveys since the carp really dropped off. And so we think that's the goldfish are really replacing the carp in this system. Yeah. So it's a fascinating study area. Hamilton Harbor, really complicated, lots of stressors, there's sewage treatment, there's eutrophication, there's habitat loss. It just has an amazing history of unfortunate things that can happen to an environment. We seem to have done it there. Yeah.
So you mentioned that it's like a 5 to 10-fold increase in what you're seeing. What did you start at? Like, what's that in actual numbers? Is it like you used to see like 2 goldfish and now you see 10, or something else?
Yeah, so we have a standard electrofishing program, so nearshore e-fishing. I don't know if you folks have talked about in the past, but
I didn't know you could call it e-fishing. That's pretty good. Yeah,
it's faster than saying electrofishing.
Yeah, you don't want to slow down for the full electro. Anyway,
electro. So going back to it's been going on since 1988, I should say, our program. So we've got a really incredible data set that we get to work with, well before my time. And my colleague Christine Boston, who's the lead author on the goldfish paper, and really has been our goldfish person for a number of years now as we've done these works. She's led that program for almost 20 years. And so, early on in the 80s and the 90s, goldfish were certainly present. It wasn't unheard of to catch a goldfish, but on a transect by transect basis, you're talking maybe, 0.1. So 1 out of 10 transects, you're going to hit a goldfish. And it's not the same across the harbor. They do tend to be more on the west end and all those kinds of things based on habitat needs. But what we sort of saw happening in 2006 was, instead of being 1 in 10, well, now it's 1 in 5, and then 3, and 2. So it's almost every other time you're hitting a goldfish when you're doing these transects. So the numbers have definitely gone up. Our colleagues at the Royal Botanical Gardens, who manage this fishway, they also have fantastic 20 years worth of data at that fishway. And in recent years, they had on one day they saw 350 goldfish trying to come through, and that's a huge increase from what they used to see as well. So there's been this sort of change in that population. And this is why goldfish are such great invaders. They can really explode in numbers when the opportunity arises. And I think 2019 was a really great year. 2018, that window, we saw our biggest catch numbers in that year, and it's come down a little bit, but still much higher than we want to see.
Do you know why it was a great year then? Was it something about the weather or?
Well, we can't confirm for sure, but 2017, 2019 were both really high water years in Lake Ontario. And actually, I believe in 2017, the fishway was topped. So it stopped being a perfect barrier for a period of time because the water level was so high. So carp certainly got over, and no doubt the goldfish got through. And it may have actually been that higher water, flooded a lot of vegetation, just better recruitment overall for that species because they have sticky eggs, they want veg. So, just a better recruitment year for them. And we're kind of seeing that play out.
Okay. So I'm going to go over detour from goldfish just for a second, sort of. Okay. So you mentioned
want to talk about electrofishing? Because I do. But no, go ahead.
Well, you can talk about electrofishing in a moment. I want to talk about this fish barrier because recently, I think it might have been Stuart who shared with a group of us this like fish doorbell. It's someplace have you seen it before?
No.
It's in Europe somewhere, and it's basically like if enough fish, they've got a little video, and if enough fish come and people are kind of like, you can watch the video, and if you see a fish, you're supposed to ring the doorbell. And if enough fish come, then they kind of open up the causeway or whatever for the fish to get through. Right. So I'm imagining like all of this like swarm of goldfish, like being like, no, we want to get in. So how, like, is there any way that they can, like, so they're actively lifting species that they want to move and leaving the others behind? Is that correct? Am I understanding that right?
Yeah, it's a really incredible piece of engineering, but basically picture like a fence with, I think it's 5 centimeter spacing on the bars. And so if you're bigger than 5 centimeters, that's sort of like you're going to get stopped at a certain point. In front of that fence, they have these cages. And so basically fish go in, trying to get into the marsh. They feel the flow of the water and the different temperature, and they try to get in, and they get stuck in these cages. And when they're in operation, the Royal Botanical Gardens staff lift twice a day. I can't remember the exact number of cages, but several cages, and they lift, and they actually can bring them up, open it, and dump all the fish out into a big container. There's videos online, highly recommend you check it out. It's really amazing. And basically then they can open a little sluice gate, and the fish kind of flow towards them, come towards them, and they'll collect some to measure carp and goldfish and all the native fishes trying to get through. But they actually have this little like door they can swing it one way or another. And if it's a carp, it goes one way out to the harbor. If it's a good fish, it goes the other way into the marsh. So they go back and forth. And there's these chutes where the fish go shooting out into the harbor or into the marsh as needed. So it's pretty incredible passage because they have to pass so many fish. Like if you can imagine, a run of white sucker trying to come through and get in, you're not talking one or two, you're talking, dozens, hundreds of fish you may be passing in a single day, back and forth. Yeah.
That is so cool. And now I feel like we're playing one of those games where it's like, beep, beep.
Yeah.
The gladiator
thumbs up, thumbs down.
Yeah.
Very cool.
It's just a real life version of Wheel of Fish, I guess. From, UHF, which I'm sure, you know what? That's all I say about
That's a Weird Al throwback, right?
Yeah, exactly. Okay. All right. So how big are the goldfish? Like, what's the biggest goldfish
they get bigger,
that you
right?
see?
It's not just like, because Fluffy in the bowl kind of is limited by the bowl, but in the harbor, they're limited by the harbor. So what I want to see,
exactly.
I want to see some big goldfish. What are we looking at?
We're talking big goldfish. So the harbor, I think the largest one we've seen is 47 centimeters, 18 and a half inches in length. The world record.
They're both holding up for you. Those of you not viewing at home. Carolyn and I simultaneously did the 2-hand kind of back and forth holding up thing, measuring out 18, or she's probably doing centimeters, but I'm measuring out 18.
I was actually, yeah.
So if you picture like a football, a Canadian football, not an American football, they're that size often, big round football-y thing. The world record, I looked it up, 23 inches, 59 centimeters, just under 10 pounds. So like, fluffier goldfish versus this, it's a massive difference in the sizes. Yeah.
All right, I'm Googling pictures of huge goldfish.
Yep. Look on there. So Christine's, she's has a great Twitter account where she has.
Oh, they get gross looking. Like the big
Some of them are
orange
quite
ones?
beautiful when they're quite big and orange and lovely, but they.
Oh, I guess that's just a difference of opinion we have then. Okay, that's what I meant.
They are an ornamental species.
Yeah, they get.
It is possible that there are many people who selected them specifically because they're pretty.
Exactly.
No, I'm placing this in the chat. That's not pretty. That thing's gross.
Okay. Oh. Wow, that's wild. Okay, so so then what kind of effect are they having? Like you said that they're sort of replacing carp. And I guess the other thing, I'm going to back up just for a second. Are goldfish technically a carp, or what are they, like a cyprinid?
Yeah, hold on. I'm important feedback here. This huge gross goldfish that I just pasted, it's some sort of a hybrid. So this is not this is a hybrid of a leather carp and a koi carp. This is a fake goldfish. I'm giving you bad news, bad information. This was a fake goldfish. I'll try to find a picture of a big real goldfish. Maybe it won't be so gross.
Okay. They absolutely hybridize. They are the family Cyprinidae, so certainly related to the common carp, and also related to Prussian carp and Crucian carp, which are other aquatic invasive species in North America. And so they can all hybridize, and they have these sort of intermediate characteristics when you're trying to identify them. So goldfish do not have barbels, but their hybrids do have barbels on their cheeks. Yeah. So yeah, definitely hybridizing.
That should have given it away. This big ugly one, this 67-pound monstrosity. Like a catfish with all the barbels.
little barbels, yeah.
Okay, so what kind of two-part question? What kind of impacts are they having on the system, specifically in Hamilton Harbor that you've studied? Mm-hmm. And then two, are they kind of, is there some degree of like badness of invasiveness? Like, are they like better or worse than the carp? Are they just the same? What's the outlook there?
I think for the second question, just briefly, maybe a little bit too early to tell, but I'll try to get back to that in a moment. Okay. In terms of the impacts too, it's really hard to distinguish what is a goldfish impact versus what is a carp impact. But if we talk about Coote's Paradise Marsh in particular, again the reason for the fishway was to stop them getting in, foraging in the sediment for benthics and invertebrates and detritus, the things they like to eat, the carp. And as a result, stirring up the sediment, really high turbidity, the vegetation's all gone, and that's not great habitat anymore for your native fishes. So that's like the carp impact. Goldfish effectively have the same impact. They eat basically the same thing as carp. They're omnivorous. They can eat a wide range of things. They forage in the same manner in the substrates and can stir things up. The only, I'll call it a benefit with quotations, is that they're smaller. So instead of it being something that's almost a meter in length, a big, huge carp doing this activity, it's a smaller goldfish. But if you have the same biomass of goldfish as you do carp, they're going to have the same types of impacts. The difference is that the fishway blocks the carp really effectively when they're a certain size. The goldfish tend to be smaller and tend to sometimes be able to get through that fish barrier, so they're actually getting back into the marsh more readily, and they can actually spawn at a much younger and smaller size. So you have, reproductively viable goldfish can get through the barrier back into this marsh, and then you have the potential for a big population to thrive back there. Just like in your fishbowl, there's very little oxygen in that fishbowl, and there's a reason the goldfish do so well, because they can thrive in low oxygen scenarios. Same thing back here in the marsh in the summer. There's sometimes not a lot of oxygen. They do great back there. So they're really well adapted to these really degraded conditions, and they can thrive and reproduce in those areas.
So that's like past the goalie. It's pretty bad news then.
Exactly. Yeah. So getting through it poses a big challenge, which can lead us onto the study and one of the reasons why we undertook it. But in terms of impacts, really similar to the carp. One other thing that the goldfish can do that the carp can't do is they will eat algae, and they can actually eat some of the more harmful algal species you see in a big bloom. They can eat that. And they're thought to also have a positive feedback with that algae, in that they eat it, they excrete it, and that nutrient-rich material they're excreting that used to be algae goes to make more algae. And so you get this cycle of reinforced by the goldfish being present that isn't as much of an issue with the carp, we don't think. But hard to quantify the extent that that's driven by goldfish alone versus the other eutrophication issues in our system, but that's one of the other potential impacts. And last one I'll mention for both the species too is that they will eat eggs and larvae. So they could actually be foraging on your native fish that are trying to recruit in these wetland areas.
So then against this background, against what might be termed an alarming increase in goldfish population, or alarming or otherwise, but like it's pretty significant, you were saying, right, in that it's going up almost year over year in your electrofishing surveys. You decided to do this study. And what is it that you wanted to learn about goldfish with the work you were doing?
Yeah, so this is the first study of its kind looking at their spatial ecology and understanding how a fish moves or species moves and what types of habitat they're using is so critical to being able to begin to develop potential management strategies for this kind of species. And so we had three sort of primary goals here. And the first was to understand that distribution in the system. So are they all across the whole harbor? Are they concentrated in certain areas? That was one of the sort of initial questions. And also, do they aggregate? So common carp will aggregate over the winter in like a big pile of carp all stacked up in one area. We don't know if goldfish do that. Another question we had was the depth of where they are in the water column. And the reason we care about that is if we want to undertake a more active method of control. So a barrier is a passive method, so they just kind of sits there and stops them from coming in. A more active method is to try to, like, if they're aggregated somewhere, can you use boat electrofishing and collect them and perhaps, do a call or whatnot? That's further down the line, but we didn't know the depth they occupy. And the last piece was we were trying to identify whether there's any drivers of specific movements that we could maybe use. So the phenology of the species, can we maybe use that to support better management of barriers? And what I mean by that is if you have a passive barrier, it blocks everyone. But if you know that your pike are going to spawn in March and your goldfish don't arrive until May, you could leave that system wide open for a month and let all your happy pike flow into the wetland and come back out before you block it off. And so there's that need to understand the phenology of these types of movements. So that the three pillars of the study were based on that. And we used acoustic telemetry as one of our methods to get at some of these questions. We also used some boat electrofishing data, and we document that trend that I mentioned in the paper. And then we used the Royal Botanical Gardens arrival data. So like every time they do a lift, they count the number of goldfish for the past 20 years. And so we use that piece to actually get at the phenology question because it gives us multiple years worth of data to work with that we can pair with water temperature to develop models.
So how far can an individual goldfish move, do you think?
So in our study, they seem to be largely contained to the harbor. So, the harbor's 8 kilometers long. It's well within their area of movement, no issues with them going end to end if they wanted to over the course of a season. We did have one individual that poked its nose out into Lake Ontario. There's only one access point I should mention between the harbor and Lake Ontario, and it's a canal, shipping canal. So one goldfish found its way out into Lake Ontario for 2 weeks and came back. Maybe too cold, came back in. However, in other studies, so they're also an invasive species in Australia, and in a river system there, they've seen them moving well over 100 kilometers. So they have the ability and capacity to make really large-scale movements. We didn't capture that in our work here, but we only had a sample size initially of 11. We've since tagged an additional, I believe, 30 goldfish, and over the years to come, we'll do some more research on that. But you need to document that they have the potential to move. We just haven't seen it. It means that Hamilton could be a source.
Help me understand sample size and how it matters here. So 11 is not a lot of fish, right? But you read, there's a lot of large scale studies that study just thousands and thousands, or you hear about like medical studies. Sometimes they'll just have like 10 people trying to remember what they ate last month. So what are the limitations? Like, what do we know with 11 fish, or how confident are we, I guess, that we're capturing the goldfish behavior with 11 or with 40
Absolutely.
now?
Yeah. So for telemetry studies, these types of works, what I like to do if it's a species that's not well known is do these kinds of smaller scale pilot studies, because you don't know what area you need to cover necessarily to address your question. Right. And putting out the receivers that are, a stationary passive receiver, it's a lot of work. So, we have the harbor pretty well covered through a larger collaborative network called the Great Lakes Acoustic Telemetry Observation System. Most of Lake Ontario is now covered as well, which is fabulous. So we've got stations everywhere that are looking. When we first started the study, we didn't have all those stations in place. So our smaller sample size is really more, can we tag goldfish? Do they survive? Can we get the kind of information we might want to or might need before you do a larger scale study of these fish? And so that was that's the reason we settled on such a initial small number. And also, are there any other areas we need to cover? And so since this work, we've actually increased the density of our receivers at the west end of the harbor because they do seem to be primarily resident in that area. We've added more receivers into some of the wetlands that are in some of the creeks and channels nearby. So it's sort of told us, okay, we need to look here more. We need to cover this area better. We also realized we need to tag some smaller goldfish because our bigger fish were not able to get through the barrier. So we've got some smaller fish tagged, more fish tagged, and better coverage in the system. Yeah. So back to the question about can we get, in terms of the small sample size, the limitation there is that if it's 1 in 1,000 fish that makes a massive migration, we do not have the sample size to detect that. We've done some work on common carp, and with that study, I believe we had a sample size of 60 to 100 maybe overall, somewhere in that range. And with that, none of the carp tagged in Hamilton really left Hamilton, but carp tagged in Toronto Harbor, which is about 50 kilometers away, they moved all over. Some of them moved all over Lake Ontario. So there's a bit of a threshold you need to hit before you do start capturing these more extensive movements. Yeah.
It would be really cool to know down the line, like, are they not leaving because they're very happy where they are? Or, yeah, so is it like essentially like a source or a sink? That would be cool.
Exactly. And Hamilton's fairly isolated at the west end. In terms of what it is, it has shallow, warm areas. To find the next shallow, warm area, fish has to go out into the cold, scary conditions of Lake Ontario and transit along that shoreline to find the next wetland area, which is tens of kilometers away. So they need to really have something pushing them out into the system to go and find those other good habitat areas, especially for a warm water species like this.
Are there predators out there that might be a problem for them?
One of the challenges with goldfish is that once they size up, they're pretty much gape limited. So there's not a lot of predators that can eat them once they're a football. Yeah. So there are predators absolutely for smaller fishes that might poke their nose out there, the salmonids and whatnot.
Any bull sharks?
No bull sharks. No.
Only in the news.
Yeah. No. But yeah, okay. So what does this mean for do you have a message that you try to share with people, or do you have a plan? Okay, I think you mentioned that depending on what you find long term, and as you continue to explore this, you could maybe open the gate at different times of year to try to block the goldfish, but not the other fish. Or you might be able to use what you know about their movement to direct them into desirable places and away from places you don't want them to be. Do you have plans, like clear plans where you're trying to go for goldfish management? And or do you have anything that you would really want people to know about how they can help manage goldfish?
Yeah, so just in answer to the first question there, we're the research group, we're an applied research group, so we want to develop the science that can support that management. We ourselves are not a management. My lab is not a management group, so we obviously would love to see, some uptake in terms of the active management. There are challenges there. Hamilton Harbor being an area of concern with contaminated sediments, these benthic-oriented fishes do tend to have high PCB heavy metal burdens that makes it actually quite challenging to do culls and remove large numbers of them, because then you're talking about actually having to pay for disposal of these fishes. It's also very challenging to do, to humanely euthanize a large number of fish. So that's definitely a challenge. Those are hurdles that will have to be overcome if we're going to implement a more active, removal culling approach. To your second question there, I want to give a shout out to Christine again too here, because she's worked really hard with the city of Hamilton and done some additional work in stormwater management ponds. So those ponds in your neighborhood. And what we find in those ponds they're a hotbed for goldfish. And it makes sense, because if you're at your house and you have your goldfish and you look around, I'm done, where do I take Fluffy? You go to the pond out back. I actually have a pond in my backyard. They get drained, but they're also connected to natural waterways. So that pond connects back to the harbor. And so what Christine's done with the city of Hamilton is actually develop some signage that can go up at these ponds that tells the story, explains why you can't be releasing your aquarium fishes back into these systems. Even though they may look disconnected, it's a pond, it all flows back into the harbor and they will get back into that system. And so the best thing we can do collectively is just limit that release in the first place. It's a challenge when they're already established in the system like Hamilton Harbor to control. It's always more challenging to control after they've gotten out, but it's that preventative educational side of this that I think is so critical, and is really the message that has to get out to folks, is that when you're done with your fish, you got to find a different place to take it. I was actually doing another interview this morning with a PBS NewsHour group, and they had just come from I think it's the Last Chance Lagoon. which is, I believe, in Pennsylvania. I'm going to get that wrong. Anyway, and it's a place you can take your fish when you are done and say, please, I can't look after my goldfish anymore. And they will take it, and it gets to live out the rest of its life somewhere else that's not at risk of it being, in theory, released out into a natural setting.
That's interesting. They've also done, so we work for Illinois Indiana Sea Grant, and our aquatic invasive species team has been a part of like pet take back events where it's kind of like, you can come and you can surrender. I'll be honest, I don't know what happens with them afterward. Going to a lagoon and living out your life sounds kind of nice.
It's all good. They go to the farm. They go to a farm
upstate, right?
Yeah.
I don't know what happens either, actually. We talked about that actually in a very recent episode with Tim Campbell. We had a follow-up on the Lakeys. We have our Lakey Awards, and then we had a follow-up episode because Titus had some complaints. And Tim Campbell joined us, and we talked about things you could do with invasive species. So I will put a link to that in the show notes. Tim Campbell,
and we
AIS
should
specialist at Wisconsin Sea Grant.
We should also link back to the episode that we just did where we drafted. We were picking monitoring equipment, and I actually mentioned GLaToS, and it was like, I think my first pick for my team, and Stuart was like, I don't think I've ever heard of this, and I felt like I had failed as a human, to have never spoken of that before.
Does it never come up
for your success as a human? I'm just not reliable.
GLaToS is an incredible network. It's amazing.
Yeah. And the data that you can visualize with it is really, really cool.
So how many goldfish have you personally eaten?
0 at this point. 0. Yeah. I'll be honest and say I actually don't eat a lot of fish to begin with. Yeah. So it's not a goldfish thing. Not that I'm recommending you eat goldfish, but I don't eat a lot of fish to begin with.
No, they can't. Well, so one of my it's not a peeve. One of my things is we love to talk about eating our way out of invasive species problems, even though as far as I can tell, it literally never happened. And I don't think it can happen. And I think it's fun to talk about. But and I understand why they talk about it and they'd be good for raising awareness and blah, 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 blah. But to me, a lot of times people go to that solution as opposed to thinking about other solutions, to the extent that thinking about solutions is even the way to think about it. But nobody's eating a goldfish. Like, it's just not going to happen. Like, I mean, you can rebrand it all you want, but it's always going to be fluffy. So
exactly. And unlike common carp, which I think are eaten often, and we have another invasive species, another invasive cyprinid in Hamilton Harbor, which is the rudd, and apparently they're also frequently eaten as well.
Always
but for some reason, not goldfish.
Yeah.
Yes. So.
Well, John, this is interesting. It's really good to hear about like all the different work you're doing on goldfish, and I had no idea that they were like a significant problem and have been forever. Going back, now you get them at the county fairs. It sounds like they used to get them at the county fairs with an E on the end back in the 17th century or whatever. And that's all good and interesting and important stuff, but that's actually not why we invited you here on Teach Me About the Great Lakes this week. The reason that we invited you on Teach Me About the Great Lakes is to ask you 2 questions, and the first one is this. If you could choose to have a great donut for breakfast or a great sandwich for lunch, which one would you choose?
I have to go with donut, and I have to give a shout out to Beechwood Donuts in St. Catharines, Ontario.
There it is. Hold on. I'm writing this down.
Yeah, you got to Google it. It's well worth. Every month they have a new donut of the month or 2 that are fabulous. I believe it's vegan. I don't know how. And their coconut cream donut.
Before. It turns on your definition of yeast very often.
Okay.
This was in the first year. This woman, I'll go back and find it. But she was a vegan and she ate donut, and I inquired, and she said, "Let's just not talk about this."
Yeah. Okay. So I'll retract the vegan statement, but at a minimum, what they do with, I think it's coconut cream, is incredible. If you like coconut at all, their coconut cream donut is phenomenal. Also, this month they are offering a Black Forest cronut that I have had once before, and it is delightful.
Yeah. You can only have 3, right? You get 3 lifetime, and then on the 4th one.
And recently they delivered it to Hamilton too, so that's even better. On the Tuesdays, they deliver donuts to Hamilton.
Really? This is great. Awesome. This is perfect.
And also, I want to point out that he was writing in there, and you misspelled donuts as well, Stuart, but I fixed it for you in the notes. And it will be correct in the show notes, which are at teachmeaboutthegreatlakes.com/96. 96, really?
96, really? Yeah.
Jeepers.
I wrote down 95. It should be 96. Yeah, thank you for volunteering to write the show notes, Carolyn. I appreciate that.
Yes, you're welcome. Okay. So, John, the second question we have for you is... So part of the goal of this show is to learn more about all the awesome places that people can explore in the Great Lakes region if they so wish. So we like to ask our guests what is a special place in the Great Lakes that you'd like to share with our audience, and what makes it special?
Yeah, so I was fortunate to do my grad studies in Georgian Bay, which is part of Lake Huron, and specifically along the eastern shore and northern shore of Georgian Bay, which is beautiful Canadian Shield country, as close to pristine as I think you can get in a lot of the Great Lakes. It's mostly cottagers out there. And for me, that place holds a special place in my heart as well, because that's where I met my lovely wife. And we the last year of my graduate studies, she and I got to spend 4 weeks, 1 week a month for the whole summer, just the two of us, camping in Massasauga Provincial Park. It's a beautiful location. And every morning we get up, make a campfire, go out in our canoe, set some fyke nets, pull the fyke nets from the night before, reset the fyke nets, come back, make fire for lunch. It was a wonderful experience. Massasauga Provincial Park is a gorgeous place. Eastern Georgian Bay is incredible, and highly recommend. I was hesitant to share it because I don't want people to go there. Yeah. But it's a must see if you ever get a chance to be in that area. The Shield is incredible. The wetlands are everywhere, and there's just wonderful biodiversity in that area.
That's fantastic. Well, we'll be sure to not go there then.
Thank you. Yeah.
No. Should I be in the neighborhood, I will definitely check it out. Well, Dr. John Midwood, research scientist with the Great Lakes Laboratory for Fisheries and aquatic scientist at Fisheries and Oceans Canada in Hamilton, Ontario, where they deliver donuts on Tuesdays. Thank you so much for coming on and teaching us all about the Great Lakes.
Thank you both.
Man, well, that was good. That was good to learn about goldfish, and phew, same goldfish. I mean, kind of phew, kind of not, or whatever. So one thing we like to do often at the end of our interviews, we do it most interviews, is to talk about one thing we learned. So, Carolyn, what's one thing you learned about the Great Lakes today?
Well, I don't know if it counts as about the Great Lakes, but about this, recent invader in the Great Lakes, the goldfish. I think it's kind of interesting that humans over such a long time can all kind of gravitate toward the same animal as a pet. I think that's really, really neat. And it, if I could stick around for a long time, those are the weird kind of questions I would want to look like. Do humans 5,000 years from now still think goldfish are cool and still potentially have to be like, wait, no, but we don't want them to invade all of our natural environments or things like that.
Yeah.
So
I'm going to ask ChatGPT that right now. Do humans...
Oh, no, please don't. I finished Robocalypse. I finished it, and it's not good. But what's something that that you learned about the Great Lakes today, Stuart?
Yeah, one thing I was going to say is that goldfish, FYI, predicting the sentiments of humans 5,000 years into the future is quite speculative.
Thank you, ChatGPT.
And then there's a whole bunch of slop. And then ultimately, whether goldfish are considered cool in the future will depend on the evolving values and preferences of future generations. Very helpful.
So they don't know.
How much carbon did I just emit to get that answer out of this stupid computer thing?
Yep.
Anyway, the point is, I learned. So I've seen these pictures of goldfish before, but they're hybrids. The biggest, grossest ones are hybrids. I did not realize that. And the barbels is a good way to check, right? I'm holding up, for those of you watching at home, I'm holding up my fingers by my mouth and wiggling them like a good barbel. Or barbel, you can pronounce it either way. Anyway, my point is this. I didn't know that. So the actual goldfish, they're still not cute. I mean, I'm just going to have to disagree with Dr. Midwood on it, that they're good looking, but that's fine. Reasonable people can disagree. But they're not nearly as gross as the 65-pound monstrosity hybrid things that just look like something out of the bad part of a Marvel movie.
Yeah. Being honest, I also felt a little bit bad in there. This is true confession time, because my pet goldfish, apparently the oxygen got really low. So
No, all of mine I killed because I didn't know that you couldn't feed them chlorinated water. So I've killed a lot of goldfish thanks to a nice fresh bowl of water. So that's cool.
Oh, well. Okay. So if you want to hang out with us, assuming this comes out before IAGLR.
Not a safe assumption, but let's pretend that it
we'll pretend that if this comes out before May 21st and you happen to be at the International Association for Great Lakes Research Conference in lovely Windsor, Ontario, Canada, you can join us at the Kildare House, which is in Walkerville, at around 8 o'clock or so on May 21st. We will be doing a live recording with Trevor Pitcher of the Great Lakes Institute for Environmental Research. If it's after May 21st when you're listening to this, spoiler alert, one of the future episodes will be a live episode with Trevor Pitcher.
You missed a chance for free food. We're going to have free food, free stickers till I run out of stickers, and a free engaging conversation with Trevor.
Teach Me About the Great Lakes is brought to you by the fine people at Illinois Indiana Sea Grant. We encourage you to check out the cool stuff we do at iicgrant.org and at ILINC on Facebook, Twitter, and other social media.
Our senior producer is Carolyn Foley, and Teach Me About the Great Lakes is produced by Megan, Lake Lover Gunn, and Renie Miles. Ethan Chitty is our associate producer and our fixer, and our super fun podcast artwork is by Joel Davenport. Joel the D-Man Davenport. And the show is edited by Svoboda. Sandra, professional name, who may be or may have been at our live show. We'll see.
If you have a question or comment about the show, please email it to teachmeaboutthegreatlakes@gmail.com or leave a message on our very old, very wonderful hotline at 765-496-4474. You can also follow the show on Twitter at Teach Great Lakes, but it's not exactly Coots Paradise over there these days. Thanks for listening, and keep grading those lakes. That's me trying to get the timing.